name is Viktor Semenovich Krasnov, and I've been working as a cleaner in one of the tallest buildings in our city for 8 years now. The 40-story skyscraper Premium Tower has become a second home to me, though I've never felt any particular attachment to it. It's just a job, stable, not requiring special skills, allowing me to support myself and occasionally help my daughter who lives in another city with her family. I'm 53 years old, and I've long resigned myself to the fact that no major changes are on the horizon. I divorced 10 years ago, live alone in a one-room apartment on the city's outskirts, wake up every morning at 5, travel to work on 2 buses, and spend the next 8 hours tidying up the offices of wealthy people. Being a cleaner in such a building has its peculiarities. Offices are leased to various companies, from small startups on the lower floors to large corporations occupying entire levels in the upper part of the building. Each floor has its own atmosphere, its own smell, its own energy. The lower floors are always noisy. Young people work there, staying late, ordering pizza directly to the office and leaving mountains of trash behind. The middle floors are calmer. Solid firms with a measured pace of work are located there. Employees leaving strictly at 6 in the evening, leaving behind only a few crumpled papers in the bins. But the upper floors are a completely different world. A museum-like silence reigns there. Expensive carpets absorb the sound of footsteps, and the air is permeated with the scent of expensive perfumes and leather. Cleaning there requires special care. You can't accidentally move an important document or knock over an antique statuette on the director's desk. My workday begins on the 37th floor, the very top one, where the managing company's offices are located. I always start from the top and descend. That's the rhythm I've developed over the years. The 37th floor is the domain of the CEO, Alexander Petrovich Volkov, a man I've only seen a few times during my entire time working here. Tall, gray-haired, always in an impeccable suit, he gave the impression of a man accustomed to power and money. His office occupies almost a quarter of the floor, with panoramic windows offering a view of the entire city. When I clean there early in the morning, the sun is just rising, and the rays of light penetrating through the huge windows transform the office into a golden palace. In such moments, I sometimes allow myself to pause for a minute and admire the view, imagining what it must be like. To work in such a place every day, make important decisions, influence the fates of hundreds of people. I clean the other floors according to a strict schedule. Offices, corridors, restrooms, stairwells. The building is equipped with a modern elevator system, but I also have access to the service stairs, which I use when I need to carry heavy equipment or when the elevators are busy. These stairs go from the basement to the very top of the building, and I've learned every turn, every step. Gray concrete walls, metal railings, fluorescent lighting. Nothing remarkable, just a functional space for moving between floors. I've grown accustomed to their monotony, to the echo of my footsteps in the empty stairwells, to that particular smell that exists in all service areas. A mix of cleaning products, concrete, and something indefinably stale. I usually return home around 3 in the afternoon, tired but with a sense of duty. My apartment greets me with silence and order. The habit of keeping everything clean extends to my personal life. I prepare simple food for myself, watch the news, sometimes read a book. I have few friends, mostly former colleagues with whom I occasionally meet at a bar near my home. They know me as a reliable, quiet person who never complains about life and doesn't meddle in other people's affairs. Perhaps this makes my life boring in the eyes of others, but I'm content with this state of affairs. After a turbulent youth, a failed marriage, and a series of questionable decisions, I value stability and predictability. The only joy in my life is calls from my daughter, Olga. She lives in Moscow with her husband and 2 children, works in a bank, and our relationship can be described as warm, though not very close. The divorce from her mother left its mark on our relationship, but over the years we've learned to communicate, avoiding painful topics. She tells me about the children, about work, about future plans, and I listen, trying to be a good father from a distance. Sometimes I send gifts to my grandchildren, but we rarely see each other. Perhaps once a year when they visit her mother. In such moments I feel my loneliness particularly acutely, but I try not to dwell on it too much. My direct supervisor is Gennady Ivanovich Petrov, a man in his 60s who heads the entire cleaning service in the building. He's been working here since the opening, knows every nook and cranny, every peculiarity of this place. Short, plump, with a receding hairline and a perpetually disgruntled expression, he is nevertheless a fair supervisor who never picks on anyone without reason. Gennady Ivanovich lives for this job. He arrives earlier than everyone else and leaves later than everyone else, knowing all the building's employees by name, from security guards to top managers. He taught me many subtleties of the profession, explaining how to work with different types of surfaces, which products to use for which dirt, how to interact with office workers without disturbing their activities. Our team also includes 4 other people. Tamara Stepanovna, a pre-retirement age woman who is responsible for the lower floors. Andrei, a guy in his 30s who combines cleaning with studying at an evening institute. Svetlana, a single mother of 2 children who has been working here for 5 years. And Mikhail, a former military man who came to us after being downsized and can't quite get used to civilian life. We don't socialize too closely, but we maintain working relationships, helping each other in difficult situations, sometimes covering for colleagues in case of illness. It's a kind of small family, united by common work and the understanding that we need each other. The Premium Tower building was constructed in the early 2000s and is considered one of the most prestigious in the city. It stands out among the surrounding buildings with its height and modern architecture. A glass facade, streamlined forms, illumination at night. Inside, everything is thought out to the smallest detail. Marble floors in the lobby, expensive finishing materials, a modern air conditioning and ventilation system. The building is equipped with all necessary security systems, including surveillance cameras, an access control system, and security personnel. I've long been accustomed to my every step being recorded by cameras, and it doesn't bother me. I have no reason to hide my actions. Over 8 years of working in this building, I've witnessed many events. Companies opening and closing, changes in management, office scandals, personal dramas of employees. I've seen people build careers and lose jobs, important deals being made and long-term plans collapsing. But I've always remained on the sidelines doing my job and not interfering in other people's affairs. This is one of the main rules of our profession: to be invisible, not to draw attention to yourself, not to discuss what you see and hear. I've learned to move through offices without disturbing people, to clean quickly and efficiently, leaving no trace of my presence except for perfect cleanliness. So my days passed, one after another, in a measured rhythm that suited me perfectly. I didn't expect big changes from life, didn't make grand plans, didn't dream of wealth or fame. My goal was simple: to honestly do my job, get paid for it, maintain my health, and help my daughter when possible. This could have continued for many more years if not for one strange incident that occurred in mid-November when I, as usual, was climbing the service stairs to the 37th floor and suddenly discovered that the staircase continued further. Where there had always been a blank wall with an end of route sign, there was now another flight of stairs leading up into the darkness. At first, I thought I'd simply taken the wrong staircase. In 8 years of work, that had never happened to me, but with age, memory sometimes plays tricks, and I decided I must have confused the service staircase with another. However, when I looked around carefully, I confirmed it. This was indeed the very staircase I had ascended thousands of times. The same gray walls, the same metal handrails, the same number on the door leading out to the 37th floor. But where there had once been a dead end, now yawned the darkness of another flight of stairs. I touched the wall with my hand. It was real, cold, rough with plaster. The steps also looked absolutely real, the same gray color as all the others in the building. The only difference was that there was no light at the top, and I couldn't make out where this staircase actually led. My first impulse was to go back down and forget what I'd seen. At my age, you start to value stability and avoid anything unclear or potentially dangerous. But curiosity proved stronger than prudence. I turned on my phone's flashlight and slowly ascended the new steps. There were exactly 18 of them, the same number as in any other flight in this building. At the top, I found a landing just like on all the other floors, but instead of a door to the office area, there was a blank wall. On it hung a sign with the number 38, styled the same as all the other signs in the building. The 38th floor. A floor that shouldn't exist because the building only has 37 floors. I double-checked my calculations, recounted the flights, went down and up again. The result was the same. The 38th floor existed, although according to all documents, plans, and diagrams of the building, it couldn't. I tried to find a logical explanation for what was happening. Perhaps it was some kind of technical superstructure that ordinary employees weren't aware of, or a secret room for the special needs of the management company. But then why was I, a simple cleaner, allowed access, and why wasn't this floor there yesterday, a week ago, a month ago? Returning to my usual duties, I couldn't concentrate on my work all day. My thoughts constantly returned to the mysterious 38th floor. I even specifically went up to the 37th floor several times under various pretexts to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The staircase indeed continued further, and the 38 sign still hung on the blank wall. By the end of the workday, I decided not to tell anyone about it. Whoever I told, colleagues, superiors, security, would either not believe me or decide I had health problems. In any case, it could negatively affect my job, and I couldn't afford to lose it. At home, I tried to find plans of the premium tower building online, but only found general information and promotional materials. Detailed architectural drawings were not publicly available. I examined photographs of the building from the outside, taken from different angles, trying to determine if it really had 37 floors or if I could have made a mistake in my counting. But the external inspection yielded nothing. Modern skyscrapers often have complex architecture, and it's difficult to determine the exact number of floors from the ground. Furthermore, the upper floors could have a different height than the lower ones, which further complicated the calculations. The next day, I came to work with a firm intention to get to the bottom of the situation. After completing my main duties, I once again ascended to the 38th floor, this time with more serious preparation. I brought a tape measure, a notepad, and a good flashlight from the service closet. First, I carefully measured the height of the stairwell. It turned out to be exactly the same as all the other staircases in the building. Then I carefully examined the walls, floor, and ceiling of the landing. Everything looked absolutely standard. The same finish, the same paint color, the same light fixtures, although for some reason they weren't working. The only source of light was my flashlight, creating bizarre shadows on the walls. I tried to understand what was behind the blank wall. Pressing my ear to the cold surface, I listened, but heard no sounds. Tapping with my knuckles, I determined that the wall was quite thick, possibly load-bearing. There were no signs of doors, windows, or ventilation openings on it. Just a smooth, plastered surface with a 38 sign. I photographed everything with my phone, though I knew these pictures would prove little. In the photos, it looked like an ordinary, unremarkable stairwell landing. Over the next few days, I continued my investigations, each time finding new details that made the situation even more mysterious. For example, I discovered that the ventilation system on this floor was working. I felt a faint airflow from the grates in the ceiling. This meant that the 38th floor was connected to the building's overall system, which meant its existence was originally laid out in the design. But then why did no one know about it? And why did it only appear now? I began to pay attention to other oddities in the building that I hadn't noticed before or hadn't given much thought to. It turned out that the elevators sometimes showed floor numbers that shouldn't exist. Several times I saw the indicator briefly display 38 or even 39 before returning to normal readings. When I asked one of the elevator technicians about it, he said it was a common malfunction of old equipment, and there was nothing special about it. But his explanation seemed unconvincing to me. Another peculiarity concerned the building's layout. I noticed that on some floors the corridors seemed longer than they should be, based on the architecture's logic. This was particularly noticeable on the upper floors where I worked the longest and knew the layout of the rooms best. Sometimes I felt like I was walking down a familiar corridor for longer than usual, even though the number of doors and turns remained the same. Perhaps it was due to fatigue or age-related changes in perception, but I felt uneasy at the thought that the building was somehow changing. At the end of the week, an event occurred that finally convinced me that something unexplainable was happening with Premium Tower. I was working late, finishing up cleaning after a corporate event on the 25th floor. It was already about 9 in the evening. The building was practically empty, and I was in a hurry to finish my work to catch the last bus. Ascending to the 37th floor for a forgotten rag, I automatically continued moving upward and found that the staircase now led not only to the 38th, but also to the 39th floor. I stopped dead in my tracks, disbelieving my eyes. Another landing, another numbered sign, another blank wall. The 39th floor appeared as suddenly and inexplicably as the 38th. I climbed up there, feeling my heart pounding furiously in my chest. Everything looked exactly the same. Gray walls, metal handrails, non-working light fixtures. The only difference was that it was colder on this floor and the air seemed thinner, as if at a high altitude. I tried to get my bearings by looking out the stairwell windows, but they were so dirty that it was impossible to discern anything outside. Besides, it had grown dark and the city lights merged into unclear blobs of light. It seemed to me that I was much higher than I should be, given the building's height, but it was difficult to verify in the dark. The only thing I could say for sure was that the staircase continued even further upward, disappearing into the darkness of the next flight. Fear gradually began to displace curiosity. I understood that I had encountered something beyond my comprehension and experience. Buildings don't grow on their own. Floors don't appear out of nowhere, and certainly not just for one person. Because I was sure no one but me knew about the existence of these floors. The security guards continued their usual rounds. The elevator operators didn't go above the 37th floor. Office employees didn't even suspect that the building had grown taller. As I descended, I carefully counted the steps and floors, trying to understand the logic of what was happening. From the 1st to the 37th floor, everything was as usual. Familiar landings, working lights, the sounds of ventilation, and the distant hum of the city outside the windows. But as soon as I went higher, everything changed. The silence became absolute, the air cold and still, and the darkness above seemed alive and waiting. I began to suspect that these floors existed in some parallel space, connected to the main building but living by their own laws. At home, I couldn't sleep, replaying the day's events in my mind. I tried to find a reasonable explanation for what I had seen, but every hypothesis fell apart upon closer inspection. Secret floors for special services? But why make them accessible to a cleaner? A perception error due to health problems. But the photographs and measurements said otherwise. Hallucinations? But they were too detailed and consistent. The only explanation that came to mind was so fantastical that I didn't dare even formulate it. The building was indeed growing, adding new floors specifically for me. The next day, upon arriving at work, I immediately went to check my suspicions. The 38th and 39th floors hadn't disappeared, but now the staircase continued even further, to the 40th floor. I felt like a person who had discovered a door to another world but didn't know whether to enter it. On the one hand, Curiosity and the desire to unravel the mystery pushed me forward. On the other hand, the instinct for self-preservation suggested it was better not to meddle in things I didn't understand. I spent the entire day in a state of internal struggle, mechanically performing my duties and thinking about the mysterious floors. By evening, curiosity won, and I decided to ascend to the 40th floor. The path there seemed longer and more tiring than usual, although the number of steps remained the same. The air became increasingly thin and the silence increasingly oppressive. On the 40th floor, the same scene awaited me, a blank wall with a sign and a staircase leading further upward. But here I noticed the first signs that these floors differed from ordinary ones not only by their inexplicable existence. A thin layer of dust lay on the floor, rising in clouds with every step I took. The dust was an unusual gray color with a metallic sheen, and it didn't look like ordinary construction dust. When I tried to sweep it away with my hand, it stuck to my skin, leaving cold, silvery traces. The walls also looked different. The paint on them was duller, as if faded by time, although the rest of the building was in excellent condition. Even stranger was that my phone on this floor showed the wrong time. Downstairs it was 6:30 in the evening, but here the screen showed various numbers that constantly changed. Sometimes morning, sometimes midnight, sometimes a completely incomprehensible combination of numbers. When I went back down to the 37th floor, the time became normal again. This made me wonder if the mysterious floors existed not only in another space but also in another time. I understood that I couldn't delay any longer. Either I had to tell someone about my discovery and try to find an explanation with the help of other people, or continue the investigation myself. The first option seemed more reasonable, but I was afraid that I wouldn't be believed, or that people would think I had mental problems. The second option was dangerous but promised answers to the questions that plagued me. In the end, I chose a compromise solution: to continue the investigations, but with maximum precautions and detailed recording of all observations. The following days, I spent studying the mysterious floors more systematically. I started a special notebook where I recorded all my observations: the time of visit, the number of floors, the peculiarities of each level, changes in my own well-being. The picture gradually became clearer but no less frightening. The building was indeed growing, adding one floor every day. By the end of the week, I had counted 45 floors, and there was no end in sight to this process. Moreover, I began to notice that the higher I climbed, the more the surrounding reality changed. On the 50th floor, something happened that made me doubt my own sanity. Ascending there once again, I discovered that the blank wall had vanished. In its place, a gaping open door led into a corridor that stretched into darkness. The corridor looked exactly like those on all other floors of the building. The same gray walls, the same linoleum on the floor, the same ceiling panels. But there was no lighting, and my flashlight barely pierced the thick gloom that seemed to swallow the light. I took a few cautious steps inside and immediately felt that the air here was different, denser, with a metallic aftertaste that lingered on my tongue even after I returned to the stairwell landing. Entering the corridor fully, I found that it was significantly longer than the building's dimensions suggested. I walked straight for several minutes, shining my flashlight ahead, but no walls or turns were visible. On both sides stretched office doors, identical to those on ordinary floors with frosted glass and plaques. But there were no company names on the plaques, only numbers: 5001, 5002, 5003, and so on. The figures were in the same font as the other signs in the building, but they glowed with a faint greenish light, as if coated with phosphor. I tried to peer into one of the rooms through the frosted glass, but couldn't make anything out. The glass was so murky that it only let through blurry patches of light. Trying to open a door, I found that it was locked, though no keyhole was visible. The door simply wouldn't yield to any effort, as if it were part of the wall. The same happened with all the other doors in the corridor. They looked ordinary, but it was impossible to open them. It gave the impression that these were mere sets, imitations of real offices created for some unknown purpose. After walking through the corridor for about 20 minutes, I still hadn't reached its end. Moreover, I had a strange feeling that I was walking in circles even though I hadn't made any turns. The numbers on the doors continued to increase, 5087, 5088, 5089. But the corridor remained absolutely straight. When I turned back, I discovered with horror that I couldn't see the exit to the stairwell landing. Behind me stretched the same endless corridor with the same doors receding into darkness. Panic began to rise in my throat, but I forced myself to remain calm and methodically search for a way back. I tried to retrace my steps, but quickly realized that no footprints were left on the linoleum. The floor was covered with a thin layer of the same silvery dust I had seen on the lower mysterious floors, but it didn't retain traces. Moreover, when I looked closely at the floor, I noticed that the dust was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but constantly flowing from one place to another as if alive. This discovery made me accelerate my search for an exit even more. I walked against the movement of the dust, hoping it would lead me back to the staircase. After half an hour of fruitless searching, I began to worry seriously. My phone battery was dying. The flashlight was growing dimmer and still no exit was in sight. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, the doors remained locked, and I began to realize that I was trapped. It was at this moment that I first heard sounds. At first, it was a barely discernible hum, like the operation of ventilation, but gradually it grew louder and transformed into something more complex, a mixture of whispers, scraping, and distant music. The sounds came from somewhere deep within the corridor, sometimes intensifying, sometimes fading, but never stopping completely. I realized that drastic measures had to be taken. Choosing one of the doors at random, I threw my shoulder against it with all my might. To my surprise, the door yielded and opened so abruptly that I almost fell. Beyond it was not an office, but a small windowless room, lit by a dim reddish light from an unknown source. In the center of the room stood an ordinary office desk, on which lay an open folder with documents. The documents were written in Russian, but their content was utterly meaningless. A collection of random words and numbers having no significance whatsoever. On the wall hung a calendar showing a date 3 days ahead of today's. This meant that time flowed faster in this place than in the real world. Next to the calendar hung a photograph depicting the same premium tower building, but it looked infinitely tall, reaching into the clouds. Written by hand on the photograph were the words, "Project completed, object ready for use." The signature was illegible, but the date was clear, precisely today's date. I grabbed the folder and the photograph and rushed to the room's exit. Fortunately, the door to the corridor was still open and I was able to get back out. But now the corridor had changed. It was shorter, and I almost immediately saw the familiar door leading to the stairwell landing. Descending to the 50th floor, I was relieved to find that everything had returned to normal. The same blank wall with the 50 sign, the same gray staircase walls. But in my hands, I held the tangible evidence of my journey into the impossible corridor. At home, I carefully examined the documents I had found. The folder contained several dozen sheets with stamps and signatures, but the text was complete nonsense, as if someone had taken real documents and replaced all the words with random ones. The only thing that made sense were the repeated mentions of vertical expansion of the object and preparation of the subject for transition. The photograph was also strange. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that the building in it was not just tall, but truly infinite. Its top was lost not in the clouds, but in some undefined haze, which could have been fog or simply emptiness. The next day, I came to work with a firm intention to tell Gennady Ivanovich about what I had seen. But when I approached him with the documents in my hands, I found that he was looking at me strangely, as if seeing me for the first time. When I began to talk about the mysterious floors, he interrupted me and said he didn't understand anything. According to him, the building had always had 51 floors and no changes had occurred. He showed me a building plan which indeed showed 51 floors, although I was sure that just a week ago there had only been 37. Even more striking was that all my colleagues also spoke of 51 floors as something self-evident. Tamara Stepanovna talked about how she had been cleaning the lower floors of this tall building for many years. Andrei complained about having to go all the way up to the 51st floor for forgotten items. Even the security guards in their conversations mentioned 51 floors as a normal part of the building. It seemed that reality had changed, and only I remembered how things used to be. I tried to show my colleagues the documents I had found, but they saw them as ordinary official papers from a company that rented an office on the 47th floor. The photograph of the infinite building looked to them like an ordinary promotional shot of Premium Tower from an unusual angle. No one noticed anything strange or unusual in what I considered material evidence of the impossible. This made me seriously doubt my own perception of reality. Perhaps the problem was with me, not the building, but my doubts were dispelled when I climbed the stairs above the 51st floor. The staircase continued further and new floors appeared every day. 52nd, 53rd, 54th. The building grew relentlessly, but for everyone else, it always had exactly as many floors as it did at that moment. Their memory and perception changed along with the physical structure of the building, and only I remained a witness to these changes. On the 55th floor, I discovered another open door, but this time behind it was not a room, but another staircase. It differed from the main service staircase. The steps were made of black marble, the railings of polished bronze, and the lighting was warm and subdued. This staircase led upwards, but it didn't look like a service stair. Rather, it resembled a grand staircase of an expensive mansion. I ascended it for several flights and found that it led to a completely different part of the building. Here, the floors looked different. Instead of gray walls and linoleum, there were marble columns, expensive carpets, and crystal chandeliers. The corridors were wider, the ceilings higher, and the air was infused with the scent of expensive perfumes and flowers. This was clearly an elite part of the building intended for special guests or important events. But it was completely empty. No people, no furniture, no signs of activity. Only luxurious finishes and a dead silence. Exploring these floors, I realized that the building was divided into zones, each living by its own rules. The lower part, ordinary offices known to all employees. The middle part, mysterious floors with locked doors and strange corridors. The upper part, luxurious apartments intended for an unknown purpose. And all this was crowned by the unknown. The staircases continued further upward, disappearing into the darkness of the subsequent levels. I began to notice that my perception of time was distorted. When ascending to the upper floors, I could spend several hours there, but upon descending, I would find that only a few minutes had passed. Or vice versa. It seemed like I had only been upstairs for half an hour, but an entire day had actually gone by. My phone showed different times depending on the floor, and I stopped trusting any time measurements. The only reliable reference point remained my own sensations: hunger, fatigue, the need for sleep, but even these sensations began to fail me. On the upper floors, I felt no hunger or thirst. Fatigue receded, and I could explore the endless corridors for hours without feeling the need for rest. Moreover, it seemed to me that I was growing younger and stronger. A glance in the mirror in one of the luxurious restrooms on the 70th floor showed me a face that looked 10 years younger. Wrinkles smoothed out, the gray in my hair became less noticeable, and my eyes acquired a clarity they hadn't had in many years. This discovery simultaneously delighted and frightened me. On the one hand, the opportunity to regain youth was tempting. On the other hand, I understood that nothing comes for free and there's always a price to pay. The price might be too high, but I could no longer stop. The building was drawing me deeper and deeper into its mystery, and each new floor opened up new possibilities and new dangers. On the 80th floor, I discovered a library, a huge hall with high ceilings filled with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. The books were in different languages: Russian, English, German, Chinese, and many others I couldn't identify. But when I opened any book, the text turned out to be the same: a description of the Premium Tower building and the people who worked in it. There were chapters about me, about my colleagues, about office employees, about security guards and cleaners. Each book was a biography of someone connected to the building, written with incredible accuracy and detail. My own biography occupied a thick, leather-bound volume. It described not only the events of my life, but also thoughts, feelings, and dreams that I had never told anyone. Moreover, the last chapters described my recent adventures on the mysterious floors with such accuracy, as if the author had been observing me every second. And the final chapter, which I read with a pounding heart, was devoted to my future. It spoke of me climbing higher and higher until I reached the very top of the building, where ultimate transformation and inclusion into the object's structure awaited me. I slammed the book shut and threw it, but it immediately returned to its place on the shelf as if attached by invisible threads. All the books in the library behaved the same way. They couldn't be carried away, moved, or damaged. They were part of the building, as integral as the walls and staircases, and all of them told the stories of people who, in one way or another, fell under the influence of Premium Tower. Stories that ended the same way, with the hero being absorbed into the building's structure and becoming part of some larger mechanism. Leaving the library, I felt that I was beginning to understand the essence of what was happening. The building was not just an architectural structure. It was a living entity that fed on people and their energy. It grew, luring those who showed a special interest in its higher floors and gradually absorbed them, making them a part of itself. I was not the first to discover the mysterious floors, nor the last to try and unravel the mystery of the endless staircase. But I could be the first to try to resist this process and find a way to escape the trap. Understanding the true nature of the building brought me no relief, only intensified my horror. I realized I had fallen into a meticulously laid trap that was slowly and inexorably closing. Each day spent on the mysterious floors made me more dependent on their influence. Returning to the normal world became increasingly painful. There I felt old, tired, deprived of the energy and clarity of thought I gained upstairs. My body began to crave the daily ascent, like an addict craves a dose. And I understood that this was no accident, but a cunningly planned process of transforming me into a part of the building. On the 90th floor, I discovered what could be called the heart of the entire system. A vast hall with a domed ceiling, in the center of which was a structure resembling a gigantic organ or a complex mechanism. Thousands of pipes, wires, and unidentified devices extended from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls and floor. The mechanism pulsed with a steady rhythm, radiating warmth and a faint reddish glow. The air around it vibrated with some inaudible music, felt not by the ears but by the entire body. I understood that this was the true heart of the building, the source of its life and growth, the control center for all processes occurring in its endless corridors. Approaching the mechanism, I saw that some of the pipes contained a liquid that slowly circulated through the system. The liquid glowed with the same greenish light as the numbers on the doors of the mysterious floors, and within it floated forms resembling human silhouettes. To my horror, I realized that these were the remnants of people who had been absorbed by the building before me. Their consciousness, their vital energy, their memories, all of it had been processed into fuel for the growth and development of the architectural monster. I looked at my future, and I felt physically ill at the realization of what awaited me. Next to the central mechanism stood a control panel, littered with buttons, switches, and screens. The screens displayed diagrams of the building, showing not only already existing floors but also those planned for construction. According to the diagrams, the building was to grow to 300 floors and then begin to expand horizontally, engulfing neighboring structures. The ultimate goal was clear: to transform the entire city into one giant structure, controlled from this center. And to realize this plan, the building needed people, their energy, their consciousness, their willingness to serve a higher purpose. I tried to turn off the mechanism, pressing various buttons and switches, but the system did not respond to my actions. Moreover, with each attempt to interfere with the device's operation, I felt a sharp pain piercing my entire body. The building was protecting its heart, and I realized that simply destroying the central mechanism was impossible. A different approach was needed, more subtle and deliberate. Studying the control panel more carefully, I found a section labeled Emergency Evacuation Protocol. This was a safety system designed for critical malfunction or external threat. Activating the protocol required a complex sequence of actions and a special access code. Fortunately, the code was indicated in one of the instructions attached to the panel. Apparently, the creators of the system did not expect anyone to reach this level without their permission. The evacuation procedure involved the gradual shutdown of all superfluous systems, the release of absorbed energy, and the return of the building to its original state. This was my chance to stop the monster's growth and free not only myself but also all those who had already become part of it. The launch of the protocol was accompanied by a loud hum and vibration that spread throughout the entire building. The control panel screens began to show the shutdown process of the systems. One by one, the indicators showing the operation of various mechanisms went out. The central apparatus convulsed, its pulsation becoming uneven and chaotic. The pipes with the glowing liquid began to empty, and I watched with relief as the silhouettes within them dissolved, transforming into a golden light that rose upward and disappeared into the ceiling. The souls of the absorbed people were freed from captivity and went to where they belonged. But the building was not going to give up without a fight. The walls of the hall began to shift, trying to crush me. The floor beneath my feet tilted, threatening to throw me into a chasm that had suddenly opened in the middle of the room. The air became thick and viscous, breathing grew increasingly difficult. The building used all its resources to stop the process of its own destruction. But the evacuation protocol had been launched, and it was impossible to stop it now. The safety system had priority over all other functions, and even the dying architectural monster could not override it. I clung to the control panel with all my might, watching as one by one the building's systems shut down. First, the growth of new floors stopped. Then the already existing mysterious levels began to disappear. The luxurious apartments, the library with biographies, the endless corridors. All of it dissolved into the air like a mirage. I felt the building losing its supernatural power, its influence on reality weakening. Time and space returned to their normal state, and my memory of the events of recent weeks became clearer and more understandable. When the shutdown process was complete, I found myself on an ordinary stairwell landing on the 37th floor. There were no mysterious floors above, only the familiar blank wall with the end of route sign. The central mechanism was gone, taking with it the entire nightmare of endless growth. My phone showed the normal time, and through the stairwell windows I could see the usual city landscape. Everything had returned to the state it was in before my misfortunes began, but I remembered every detail of what had happened. Memory was the only proof that the nightmare had been real. Descending to the service area, I found Gennady Ivanovich going about his usual duties. He was preparing the cleaning schedule for the next week and didn't pay much attention to me. When I cautiously inquired about the number of floors in the building, he looked at me in surprise and said there were 37, as there always had been. No 51 floors remained in his memory. Reality had been restored, and all traces of the building's interference with the normal course of things had vanished. But I knew this was not the end of the story, only a temporary respite. In the following days, I carefully observed the building, awaiting new signs of supernatural activity. But Premium Tower behaved like an ordinary skyscraper. People worked in offices, elevators carried passengers. I cleaned the premises according to the usual schedule. No mysterious floors, no anomalies of time and space. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was merely feigning death, gathering strength for a new offensive. It was too complex and powerful to disappear forever from a single evacuation protocol. My suspicions were confirmed a month after the described events. Climbing the service stairs to the 37th floor, I noticed that the wall at the end of the route had become thinner. It no longer looked like a load-bearing structure, but resembled a temporary partition. When I put my ear to it, I heard a distant hum of mechanisms and a whisper of voices. The building was recovering, slowly and carefully rebuilding its supernatural parts. The process was much slower than the first time, but it was happening. The architectural monster had learned from its defeat and was now acting more covertly. I understood that a long war awaited me with this entity. It was not going to abandon its plans to seize the city and absorb people. My victory was temporary, and now the building knew of my existence and my capabilities. The next round would be more dangerous and complex. But I had one advantage. I knew how the system worked, where its control center was located, and how to activate the emergency evacuation protocol. This knowledge could be decisive in the future confrontation. I began to prepare for a new encounter with the mysterious floors. I studied the building's architectural plans, searched for information about its construction and designers, trying to understand who and why created this monster. Gradually, a picture emerged of a grandiose experiment to create living architecture capable of autonomous growth and development. Premium Tower was not the only such building. Similar projects were being implemented in different cities around the world, creating a network of interconnected structures that, in the future, were to unite into a single system for controlling humanity. Every morning, coming to work, I looked at the familiar building with new eyes. For everyone else, it was just an office center, a symbol of prosperity and modernity. But I saw in it a sleeping demon that would sooner or later awaken and continue its work of absorbing people and expanding its influence. My task was to stop it before it became too powerful. And I was ready for this fight because I knew, if I didn't do it, no one else could. I was the only person who remembered the truth about the endless staircase, and that made me both the most important and the most vulnerable link in the chain of events that would determine the fate of not only our city but the entire world. The wall at the end of the stairwell continued to thin day by day, and I knew that soon I would see the 38th floor again. But this time, I will be ready. I have a plan, I have knowledge, and I have the resolve to see this fight through to the end. The building may be immortal, but it is not omnipotent. Every monster has a weakness, and I will find it. The endless staircase will no longer be endless. I will turn it into a path to liberation for all who have been trapped in the architectural nightmare. This is my mission, my duty to those who have already become part of the building, and to those who may become its victims in the future.